The storm was relentless, its icy winds howling through the streets of Austin. Emily Matthews stood in the shelter's parking lot, drenched to the bone, her rain-soaked jacket clinging to her like a second skin. The call had come at 2 a.m., David's voice urgent, almost panicked, telling her that there was something special about the dog they had just received. A German Shepherd mix, abandoned on a rainy night, and brought in with a story that hadn't yet been fully told. Emily had been a shelter worker for over 15 years, but there was something about this dog, something that stirred a memory deep within her, something that reached through the layers of grief she had built up over the years. The sound of the dog's mournful howl echoed through the empty shelter, breaking the usual quiet of the late hours. The howl wasn't just a cry for attention. It was a cry for understanding, for someone to listen. "Over here," David's voice broke through her thoughts, and she followed it down the dimly lit hall to the isolation wing. There, in a corner kennel, sat the dog, its amber eyes locked onto Emily's, a gaze full of awareness, understanding, and something more, something Emily couldn't place but knew was powerful. David handed her a soggy intake form. The name scribbled on the top read, "Zoo." "This dog, she's different," David said, his voice thick with concern. "She responds to every toy we show her, but there's no excitement, no joy. Just this longing." Emily knelt down to the kennel's bars, her hand extended toward the dog. When Zoo moved closer, Emily felt a spark, a connection, like something unspoken passed between them. The storm outside raged on, but inside, everything else faded away. The dog's wet nose touched her fingers, and in that moment, Emily understood. This was more than just a dog with abandonment issues. This dog had a story, one she was ready to share, but only with the right person. "I know," Emily whispered to Zoo, the words coming from a place deep inside her. "I know what you're feeling. I know what it's like to lose everything." The morning sun was just starting to creep through the shelter windows as Emily sat at her desk, staring at a photograph that had been her guiding light for over a decade. It was a picture of her younger sister, Sarah, with their childhood dog, Max. The photo was taken just 3 days before the accident that had changed everything. That winter morning, Sarah had been walking Max when a drunk driver swerved onto the icy road. Max had pushed Sarah out of harm's way, taking the brunt of the impact. Both Sarah and Max had died that day, and the grief had nearly torn her family apart. Emily had survived, but the guilt, the survivor's guilt, had never left her. Emily's path had shifted after the tragedy. It was during her darkest days that she first stepped into the animal shelter, looking for any kind of connection, something to fill the emptiness. A voice had told her, "You've got your sister's eyes, the kind that see right into an animal's soul." Those words had sparked something inside her. They had given her a reason to keep going. She had dedicated her life to saving and healing animals, helping them find homes and families that would love them. In return, they had helped heal the cracks in her own heart. Now, at 32, Emily was the shelter's lead behavioral specialist. Her colleagues joked that she had a sixth sense when it came to matching animals with their forever families, but Emily knew it wasn't magic. It was understanding, deep, unshakable understanding of how love could heal the deepest wounds. Zoo's arrival stirred something in Emily. It reminded her of Max, the same depth of love, the same fierce loyalty. Maybe, just maybe, Zoo had come to heal more than herself. As Emily prepared for her morning rounds, her fingers brushed the small, silver locket she always wore. A locket that held tiny pictures of Sarah and Max. She spoke softly to herself. "You're still guiding me, aren't you?" She was about to find out just how deeply Zoo's arrival would change everything. Welcome to Heart Force, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you're listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The morning at the shelter was chaotic as usual, with volunteers arriving to care for the animals and dogs barking in excited anticipation of their morning walks. Emily, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. She kept returning to the thought of Zoo, That deep, knowing gaze, the connection that had almost felt like a silent plea. She couldn't help but wonder. Was there more to this dog than anyone realized? Her morning was interrupted by a knock on the office door. It was David, holding a steaming cup of coffee with a concerned expression on his face. "You look like you haven't slept," David remarked, setting the cup down on Emily's desk. "That new dog, she got under your skin, didn't she?" Emily nodded, rubbing her temples. "It's not just her, David. There's something about her. It reminds me of Sarah, of Max. The way Max would look at Sarah, the way he understood her when no one else did." Her voice trailed off. David tilted his head, his eyes softening with understanding. He was one of the few who knew the whole story. "You think Zoo's got a connection like that? Like the one you had with Max?" Emily didn't respond right away. She couldn't. The truth was she wasn't sure. But there was something about Zoo's presence, something that felt familiar and yet impossibly distant. It was as if Zoo was waiting for something. Maybe Emily wasn't just meant to rescue Zoo. Maybe Zoo was here to rescue her. "I think she's here for a reason, David," Emily whispered, more to herself than to him. "Just like I was meant to be here." As the day wore on, Emily's thoughts kept drifting back to the story of the Winters family, particularly Sophie, their young daughter. Emily had learned about their tragic loss when she went over Zoo's paperwork. Sophie, just 11 years old, had already lost so much. First, their beloved dog Rex had been the family's guardian for years, but in a heroic act, Rex had pushed Sophie out of harm's way when a car came barreling toward her. The car had struck Rex instead, and he had passed away in Sophie's arms. Sophie's grief had been monumental, and now, to make matters worse, they were facing the reality of losing their home due to mounting bills. Sophie's broken heart was further torn as she watched Zoo, the younger German shepherd who had been Rex's companion, grow increasingly anxious and confused. Zoo wandered the house, searching for Rex, waiting for a friend who would never come home. "Sophie, what are we going to do with Zoo?" Catherine, Sophie's mother, had whispered to Thomas one evening, the weight of their impossible choices pressing down on them. "We can barely afford food, let alone keep a second dog in our tiny apartment. We promised Rex forever. How can we give that up?" The thought of giving up Zoo had broken Sophie's heart. Yet Catherine, too, understood that this was the reality they had to face. But how could they do it? How could they separate the last living connection to Rex? It seemed like a betrayal. The decision was painful. But Catherine and Thomas had reached the conclusion that it was time for Zoo to find a new family. The process wasn't simple, and the idea of surrendering Zoo made Sophie feel like she was losing another piece of herself. Catherine and Thomas were making the heartbreaking decision to surrender Zoo when the call came from the shelter. They were at their breaking point. Financially, emotionally, the Winters family could hardly hold it together anymore. They'd lost their home, they'd lost Rex, and now they feared losing Zoo, the only remaining link to their past. "Could you take her in?" Catherine had asked, voice trembling. "Could you find her a family who will love her the way we did?" Emily had hesitated. The burden of the Winters story weighed heavily on her, but she could see the anguish in their eyes. She had known that pain. She had lived it, and she had seen how animals could heal wounds that no human could touch. Zoo was more than a dog. She was a key to healing for Sophie and for her family. Emily didn't answer immediately, but a deep feeling inside her told her that this wasn't just another adoption. This was a chance to help two families heal, a chance to give Zoo, just like Emily, the second chance she needed. Later that day, Emily stood before the shelter's board of directors, presenting Zoo's case. But as she explained Zoo's background and behavior, she saw the disapproval in their eyes. They'd been through this before, families who couldn't handle the burden of a traumatized dog. It had always been a risky undertaking. Yet, Emily stood firm. "Zoo's special. She's not just another dog," Emily insisted. "I've seen it, the connection she has with Sophie, with her family. If we let her go, we're not just giving up on a dog. We're giving up on something greater. We have to try." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, one that few were willing to take on. But deep inside her, Emily knew that the fight was worth it. Zoo wasn't just an animal. She was a bridge, a beacon of hope, a healing force. It had been a week since the Winters had reluctantly agreed to surrender Zoo, and a shelter had officially taken her in. Yet, despite their decision, Sophie's grief only seemed to deepen. She would sit for hours by the window, her small hands clutching Rex's worn collar, staring out at the empty yard where Rex had once played. Zoo's absence only amplified the loneliness that had settled in the Winter household. "Mom, I don't want to go to the shelter today," Sophie whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "What if they give her to another family? What if she forgets about us?" Catherine tried to soothe her, brushing a hand over Sophie's tangled blonde hair. "Zoo won't forget you, sweetheart. She'll always remember the love you gave her." But Catherine's own heart was breaking. As a mother, it was her job to protect Sophie, to hold the family together in the face of this overwhelming loss. And yet, everything she had worked so hard to protect was slipping through her fingers. In a moment of desperation, Catherine reached out to the one person she could trust, Emily Matthews at the shelter. Emily had been working with the animals at the shelter for years and was known for her unique ability to connect with the most traumatized pets. Catherine hoped that maybe Emily could help Zoo heal, just as she had healed so many other animals. The phone rang that afternoon. Emily's voice was steady but warm when Catherine explained her worries. "I know this is hard, Catherine," Emily said, "but maybe it's time for Zoo to find a new home, somewhere she can thrive. She's been through so much already." Catherine's heart sank. She wanted to believe Emily, but the thought of giving up Zoo was still too painful. "I'm just not sure anymore, Emily. Everything feels like it's falling apart. Sometimes, letting go isn't about giving up," Emily replied softly. "It's about giving them the space they need to heal, and sometimes that healing comes in ways we don't expect." Catherine wasn't sure if she believed it, but one thing was clear. The Winters could no longer keep Zoo. She had become a constant reminder of what they had lost, a reminder that was slowly breaking them all. Meanwhile, Emily was feeling the weight of her own past. As she sat in the shelter office that evening, a picture of Sarah and Max by her side, memories flooded back. She had lived through the pain of losing a sibling, losing a dog. She understood what it meant to grieve. She understood what it meant to feel like you were losing everything. But she had also seen firsthand how animals could heal hearts. Zoo was different from the other dogs Emily had worked with. There was a quiet wisdom in her eyes, a deep understanding that seemed beyond her years. As Emily observed Zoo's behavior, she realized that Zoo was carrying something more than just the weight of her abandonment. She was carrying the weight of a family's love, a love that had been broken but was still, somehow, trying to piece itself back together. "I need to find a way to help," Emily thought as she gazed at Zoo through the shelter's fence. "This isn't just about finding a home for a dog. This is about healing two broken families." Later that week, when Emily met with the Winters, Sophie clutched her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide with hope. "Do you think we could keep Zoo, even just for a little while?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Emily looked at the young girl, seeing the raw vulnerability in her eyes. "What if I told you that there's a way for you to stay connected to Zoo, to help her heal, just like she helped you heal?" Sophie's face lit up with a glimmer of hope, but Catherine wasn't so sure. "What do you mean?" she asked warily. Emily explained her idea, a shared custody arrangement. It wasn't perfect, but it would give Sophie and her family a chance to stay involved in Zoo's life without the pressure of full ownership. They would share custody with another family, a family that had the resources and stability that the Winters simply couldn't provide. "It's not about letting go completely," Emily said softly. "It's about allowing both families to heal, about giving Zoo the chance to give back what she's received." Catherine was silent for a long moment. She could see the hope in Sophie's eyes, the desperate need to hold on to the connection she had with Rex, with Zoo. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I'm ready to let go of her," Catherine whispered, looking at Sophie, whose eyes were now filled with tears. "But maybe this is the only way." Emily smiled gently. "Sometimes The greatest love we can give is the willingness to share it. Let's try this together. The decision wasn't easy for either family, but they agreed to move forward with the shared custody plan. It was a risk, a leap of faith, but sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest healing. The shared custody arrangement wasn't without its challenges. The Winters and the Martinez families came from different worlds, one struggling to stay afloat, the other established but still carrying the weight of their own personal losses. The transition was rocky, filled with uncertainty and moments of doubt. The first few weeks were the hardest. Sophie and Isabella, despite their shared bond with Zoo, struggled to understand their roles in this new setup. At times, it felt like the love they had for Zoo was being divided, stretched too thin between two homes. Sophie found herself missing Zoo with a ferocity she hadn't expected. She'd been so certain that Zoo was meant to be a part of their family forever, and now, every exchange, every weekend visit, felt like a reminder that nothing in life was guaranteed. Isabella, on the other hand, retreated deeper into herself. Her anxiety attacks had returned with a vengeance. Without Luna, her therapy dog, she had become silent again, and the only comfort she found was in the steady presence of Zoo. But even that was starting to feel like it was slipping away. The two girls, once so eager to bond, found themselves in competition for Zoo's attention. The dog was a source of comfort and love, but now that love was stretched between them like an invisible thread, fragile and taut. "She's supposed to be with me," Sophie whispered to her mother one evening, tears slipping down her face. "I don't want to share her. Not like this." Catherine pulled her daughter into her arms, trying to find the right words, but nothing seemed to help. "Honey, I know this is hard, but maybe sharing her is what will help us all heal. Zoo isn't just ours. She has so much love to give, and sometimes love doesn't divide, it multiplies." But Sophie didn't hear her. All she could feel was the emptiness of Rex's absence, the gnawing pain of losing Zoo in the same way. Every time she looked at her dog's collar or walked past Rex's favorite spots, the grief would rise up in her, threatening to pull her under again. At the Martinez home, Isabella spent hours each day trying to fill the void left by Luna. She had always been a quiet girl, but Luna's presence had given her the confidence to speak, to be heard. Now, without Luna, Isabella's silence had returned. It was as if the world had closed off from her once more, leaving her trapped in her own anxious thoughts. But Zoo, in her quiet wisdom, never pushed Isabella to speak. She would simply lay beside her, her presence a constant comfort. At night, when Isabella's fears would grow too loud, Zoo would nudge her hand gently, reminding her that she was not alone. Zoo's presence was the bridge between the two girls, the connection that they both desperately needed. Still, even the moments of peace were fleeting. When the two families met at the shelter for their weekly exchange, there was always a sense of tension in the air. The emotions were raw, the guilt of not being able to provide a stable home for Zoo hanging over everyone. But then something began to change. Sophie and Isabella slowly started to understand that they didn't have to compete for Zoo's love. The dog wasn't a replacement for Rex or Luna. She was a new connection, a healing force that had brought them together in ways neither family had anticipated. Zoo had the ability to help them heal, but only if they allowed her to be a part of both of their lives. The breakthrough came one Saturday afternoon. Sophie and Isabella were in the Martinez's backyard, sitting together on the grass. Zoo had always loved to play fetch, but today she seemed different. Instead of playing, she lay quietly between the two girls, her head resting gently on their laps. Sophie looked at Isabella, her eyes still red from crying earlier. "I miss Rex so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella, who hadn't spoken in days, finally lifted her head. "I miss Luna too," she murmured, her voice shaky but stronger than it had been in weeks. "But we still have Zoo, don't we? She's not Luna, but she's here, and she's trying to help us." Sophie's heart ached, but in that moment, something shifted inside her. Maybe she didn't have to let go of Rex to love Zoo. Maybe Zoo could be a piece of the healing they both needed. Emily had been watching the two girls from the shelter window, and as she saw the moment unfold, she couldn't help but smile. This was the breakthrough she had been hoping for. The love that Zoo offered wasn't just a comfort. It was the bridge that connected these two broken families, healing them in ways they never expected. The months following the breakthrough were filled with both triumphs and struggles, but each step forward felt like a victory. The shared custody arrangement began to feel more natural, less like an experiment, and more like a bond that was meant to be. The two families, once strangers, had found a rhythm, a dance between them that revolved around love, patience, and understanding. Isabella's anxiety lessened with each visit. She began speaking more openly, even starting to share stories about Luna and Rex, the dogs who had shaped her life in such profound ways. Sophie, too, began to find healing. She stopped clutching onto Rex's collar so tightly, and while she would always miss him, she began to understand that Zoo wasn't a replacement. Zoo had a special place in her heart, just as she had in Isabella's. One evening, as the families gathered at the Martinez's home for their weekly dinner, Sophie and Isabella sat side by side, talking and laughing as they taught Zoo a new trick. The dog responded with her usual enthusiasm, rolling over and wagging her tail, as if she understood that these two girls, who had once been so lost, were now finding their way together. "I'm so glad we decided to share her," Sophie said, glancing at Isabella with a soft smile. "It helps me feel closer to Rex again." Isabella nodded, her voice steady. "She's teaching me how to talk about Luna without feeling like I'm betraying her. She helps me remember." The families shared a quiet moment of reflection, the weight of their shared journey settling over them like a warm blanket. It wasn't just Zoo that had healed them. It was the connections they had built, the bonds that had formed from their shared grief and their shared love for the dogs who had shaped their lives. But even as things began to settle, the pressure of the community's judgment loomed overhead. Margaret Wilson, a vocal critic of the shared custody arrangement, had been working tirelessly to dismantle the program. She believed that the experiment had gone too far, that allowing two families to share custody of a dog would only create chaos and instability. The community had rallied behind Margaret, and soon, it felt like everyone was against the families. The Winters and the Martinez families were no longer seen as the brave ones taking a chance on love. They were seen as irresponsible, as people who had made a reckless decision that was now threatening the very fabric of their lives. Emily felt the weight of it all. She had spent her career working to give animals second chances, to help people find healing through their pets. But now, she was fighting not just for the families, but for the very idea of second chances. And it was a battle she was determined to win. The day of the city council meeting came. Emily stood in front of the room, her voice steady as she presented the case for the shared custody arrangement. She spoke of Zoo's unique ability to connect with both girls, of how the dog had helped them heal in ways no one could have predicted. "This isn't just about saving one dog," Emily said, her voice rising with passion. "This is about showing the world that healing doesn't always follow the path we expect. Sometimes, it takes the courage to take a chance, to let love multiply instead of divide." The room was quiet as Emily finished her speech. For a moment, it seemed like no one was listening, like the weight of the opposition was too heavy to overcome. But then, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who had witnessed the healing power of the family's bond, stood up. Her voice was shaky but filled with conviction. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I saw Sophie grow up with Rex. I watched her almost die that day, and I watched Rex save her life. And now, I see these two families who have lost so much finding a way to heal through love. If that's not worth supporting, I don't know what is." Her words sparked something in the room. Slowly, others began to speak up, sharing their own stories of how they had witnessed the transformation in both girls. One by one, the community began to see that the shared custody arrangement wasn't about chaos. It was about healing, about giving two families the chance to rebuild their lives after loss. Margaret Wilson, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke. Her voice was sharp and defiant. "This is a mistake," she insisted. "These families can't handle the responsibility of caring for a dog. They're just trying to fill the emptiness inside them." But Emily was ready. "Sometimes we don't just need to be filled," she said, her voice unwavering. "Sometimes we need to learn how to heal. And that's what this is, a chance for both families to heal with Zoo's help." As the meeting drew to a close, it was clear that the tide had turned. The city council, once determined to shut down the shared custody program, now found themselves questioning their stance. They had seen the power of Zoo's love, the strength of the bond between the Winters and Martinez families. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were still challenges to face, still doubts to overcome. But one thing was certain. Zoo had given them all something they hadn't thought possible, a way forward. As I reflect on this story, I'm reminded that healing doesn't always happen in the way we expect. Sometimes, it requires taking risks, stepping into the unknown, and trusting that love will find a way. Whether through the unconditional love of a dog or the support of a community, healing is possible, even in the face of loss. What do you think about the story? Have you ever experienced a situation where healing came from an unexpected place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Heart Force for more inspiring stories. It was a night unlike any other at Swedish American Hospital. A fierce storm had descended upon Rockford, Illinois, and the streets outside were swallowed by sheets of rain. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the emergency room, casting long, harsh shadows across the sterile hallways. Inside, Jenny Joseph, a dedicated neonatal nurse, was finishing up her shift, preparing herself for yet another night surrounded by fragile lives. She'd seen it all after 23 years of service. The heartbreak, the miracles, the moments of grace. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened that stormy April evening in 2004. As Jenny hurried toward the emergency department, a sudden movement caught her eye. Through the glass doors, she saw it, a trail of dark puddles leading from the entrance to the reception desk. And then, an eerie, low whine broke the silence, a sound that sent a chill through her spine. Jenny rounded the corner and froze. Standing there, soaked to the bone, yet strangely still, was a German shepherd in worn military gear. His intense brown eyes locked onto hers, and in his mouth, carefully held between his teeth, was a battered shoebox. It was soaked through with rain, barely holding together. "Ma'am," the security guard's voice was shaky. "This dog, it won't let anyone near it except to call for you. It's out a tag, pointing to your name on the NICU roster." Jenny's heart skipped a beat. She had seen some unusual things in her career, but nothing like this. She knelt slowly, her hands trembling, as she approached the dog. The moment she did, Max, the military dog that had served alongside Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson, dropped the box gently at her feet and nudged it forward with his nose. The faint sound of a baby's cry echoed from within the box. Jenny's breath caught in her throat. Inside the box, barely moving, was a newborn baby. The infant, wrapped in a dish towel, was cold to the touch and struggling to breathe. Jenny's years of experience kicked in as she instinctively moved to wrap the baby in a warm blanket, but her eyes never left Max. He was standing guard, as though waiting for her approval, his eyes locked on the door. Before she could fully comprehend what had just happened, the team around her sprang into action. The baby's condition was critical. His tiny body weighed no more than 3 pounds, and he was suffering from severe hypothermia. But it was clear to Jenny that the baby wasn't the only one in need of help. Max, the military dog who had pulled survivors from rubble in Afghanistan, was still standing at attention by the door, as if knowing his mission was far from over. He had carried the infant through the storm, ensuring the child's survival. Jenny's mind raced. How had this dog known to come here, to find her? She turned to the nurse beside her, her voice steady. "Get the NICU team here, stat. This baby's fighting for his life." The storm outside raged on, but inside Swedish-American hospital, a miracle was unfolding. Jenny couldn't have known that this was just the beginning of a life-changing journey for the Wilson family, for Max, and for a tiny baby named Alan. Welcome to Heart Force, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. The storm outside was relentless, and every drop of rain that hit the pavement seemed to echo the weight of what had just transpired. Max, though soaked to the bone, remained still by the emergency room doors, his military vest clinging to his form and his loyal eyes unwavering. There was something almost human in his gaze as he watched Jenny and the medical team work frantically around the tiny infant he had carried through the night. Jenny knew it was a miracle the baby had survived. The cold, the exposure, the rough treatment of being carried in a shoebox. None of it should have ended like this. Yet, somehow, the baby was alive. As she carefully placed him in the warming incubator, she looked back at Max, who had been standing guard by the door the entire time. His job, however, wasn't over. Outside, the rain continued to fall in torrents, and Max's eyes never left the hospital doors. His loyalty and instinct had led him here. But what was it that kept him vigilant? Jenny had heard stories of military dogs who had saved lives in the most extraordinary ways, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't just a job for Max. This was personal. As if waiting for something more to happen, Max remained rooted to his spot, his body tense, his ears alert. It was almost as if he was protecting not just the baby, but something else, something more. Max's story had begun long before this stormy night. 7 years prior, he had been an integral part of the K-9 Search and Rescue Unit, serving with Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson. They had faced countless dangers together, pulling survivors from rubble in war-torn Afghanistan, locating missing soldiers, and performing rescues in the most hostile conditions. Thomas often said that Max wasn't just trained, he had an almost supernatural sense for human suffering. But that had all changed in late 2003. In the midst of a routine search near Kandahar, Thomas had stepped on an IED. His last words to Max were simple yet profound. "Stay back, boy. Stay safe." But Max, the brave German shepherd, refused to leave his fallen handler's side. When he was found 3 days later, it wasn't just his body that had been broken. Max's spirit had been shattered as well. The trauma of losing Thomas had changed him. He had retreated into himself, unwilling to work with anyone else. Months of rehabilitation attempts proved futile, and Max was honorably discharged from the service. The dog that had once been fearless and unshakable was now a shadow of his former self. But it wasn't the end for Max. He was sent to Hope's Haven, a sanctuary for retired military dogs in Rockford, Illinois. And it was there, at the very place where Max found his next purpose, that his path would cross with Jenny's once again. Jenny had been working in Swedish-American Hospital's NICU for over 2 decades. She had earned a reputation for taking on the most difficult cases, those babies who had no chance at life, those that others had given up on. She became known as the Night Angel, always volunteering for the overnight shifts, believing that mothers and babies needed her the most in the quiet of the night. But her strength had been forged through pain. 10 years earlier, Jenny had lost her own pregnancy at 23 weeks. It was a loss that changed her forever, turning her grief into purpose. She never took a case lightly, always treating every infant like her own child. Her connection to the military was personal as well. Her father had been a medic in Vietnam, and it was his stories of battlefield medicine that had inspired her to pursue a career in neonatal care. She had carried those stories with her, shaping her into the woman she had become. When she heard about Max, she felt a strange pull. She knew his story, the heroic rescues, the bond with Thomas Wilson. But she also knew that Max had suffered, just as she had. His story resonated with her on a deep level. As the storm raged on that night, Jenny stood in the hospital hallway, looking at Max through the glass doors. He was still standing there, motionless, watching as the team worked to stabilize the baby. He was waiting, and Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for her. She approached him slowly, her footsteps echoing through the quiet hospital. The connection between them was instantaneous. It wasn't just the shared history of military service or the bond between a nurse and a dog. It was something more. Max had carried that baby through the storm, and now he was waiting for Jenny to complete the mission. "Good boy, Max," Jenny whispered, reaching out to stroke his fur. "You've done your part." Max gave a soft wag of his tail, his eyes never leaving the entrance. Jenny knelt down beside him and rested a hand on his head, her fingers brushing the worn dog tags around his neck. There was a sense of duty about him, a loyalty that transcended his service years and the trauma he had endured. It wasn't just the military training. Max was following a call, a mission that had begun long before this night. Little did Jenny know, Max wasn't just guarding the hospital. He was guarding something much more precious, the future of a family, a legacy of service, and a promise made by a father to protect his daughter, even from beyond the grave. Max's vigil continued into the early hours of the morning. The storm had not let up, its fury echoing against the hospital windows. Jenny, exhausted but focused, couldn't help but steal a glance at the German shepherd standing watch by the NICU door. There was something otherworldly in the way Max held himself, a quiet strength that filled the room even when the chaos of the emergency room buzzed around him. For hours, Max had remained alert, steadfastly guarding the door, never straying far from the baby's side. The hospital staff had come to respect him, offering him water and blankets, but he refused to rest. His presence was a constant reminder that there was something much larger at play here, a bond, a mission that transcended time and circumstance. It wasn't until the early morning that Jenny was able to sit with Max for a moment of quiet. She walked into the waiting room, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but her mind still racing. She sat beside Max, placing her hand gently on his ruffled fur. The dog didn't flinch, as if he was used to this comforting touch, the connection that ran deeper than simple companionship. "I know you've been through a lot, Max," she murmured softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the storm outside. "But this isn't over yet. We have more work to do." The words felt strangely prophetic. Jenny's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her colleague, Dr. Walsh, the senior neonatologist. "The baby is stable for now, but it's a long road ahead. I'll need you to stay with him for the next few hours." Jenny sighed, the weight of her responsibility settling in. "I'll be there in a minute," she replied, but her gaze remained fixed on Max. His eyes met hers, and in that silent exchange, she knew they were both waiting for something more. What exactly, she wasn't sure, but they were both a part of something far larger than themselves. Meanwhile, the storm outside showed no sign of relenting. The streets of Rockford had become treacherous, a battleground of nature's fury. The local authorities had issued warnings, and emergency responders were on high alert. Yet, through it all, Max had not faltered. He had seen the worst of human suffering, experienced the horrors of war, and had come out on the other side stronger for it. Now, he stood as the final guardian of a little boy's life. Back at the hospital, the NICU staff continued to work tirelessly on the baby. His vitals were improving, but he wasn't out of the woods yet. Each breath was a fight, and every second counted. Jenny had seen this kind of fragility before, newborns teetering on the edge of life. But there was something different about this child, something that made her believe that he was meant for more than just survival. Jenny couldn't shake the feeling that this baby had been sent here for a reason. But why? Why had Max, this extraordinary dog, been the one to find him? As she prepared to leave the waiting room, Jenny looked down at Max one last time. "I don't know what's next, but we'll get through this together. You've already done more than most people could ever dream of." Max's tail thumped softly against the floor, his eyes never leaving her as she walked out the door. In the hours that followed, Jenny remained at the baby's side, monitoring his progress. Despite the small victories, though, she couldn't stop thinking about the dog and the strange pull she felt toward him. He wasn't just any dog. Max had been through hell and back with his handler, Sergeant Thomas Wilson. He had carried the weight of that loss with him, and now, against all odds, he had brought a baby into her care. In the early morning light, Jenny finally learned more about Max's past. She had been told that Max had served with Wilson in Afghanistan, that he had been a hero in the most literal sense. But she never knew the full depth of his story until she spoke to the head of Hope's Haven, the sanctuary where Max had been living after his military service. Max had been wounded in both body and spirit. The loss of his handler had irrevocably changed him. He had retreated, refusing to interact with any new handler, consumed by grief. After months of failed rehabilitation attempts, the military had made the decision to retire Max and send him to the sanctuary. But the trauma had never left him. He had withdrawn into himself. Choosing to keep to the perimeter of the sanctuary, his military instincts still sharp, but his heart broken. And then, one day, something shifted. He had picked up a faint cry carried on the wind. A sound so distant, so weak, yet unmistakable. Max, with all his training and instincts, knew immediately what he needed to do. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a call to duty, a call to fulfill the promise his fallen handler had made, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Max's actions weren't the result of a trained response alone. They were the culmination of a final order, an order that had been passed down through the years, from Thomas Wilson to his loyal dog. The bond between them was unbreakable, and even in death, Thomas had made sure that Max would always be there to fulfill his duty. His last letter to his family had made that clear. Max had a mission, and he would complete it no matter the cost. And now, here Max was, in the heart of a storm, standing guard over the future of a young mother and a child who was too small to fight for himself. "Thank you, Max," Jenny whispered, as she finally left the NICU to catch a brief moment of rest. "I don't know how we'd have done it without you." Max's story was far from over, but one thing was certain. He was never going to stop fulfilling his duty. The days that followed the storm felt like a blur of shifting roles and tireless efforts. Jenny watched as baby Alan slowly, but steadily, regained strength. Every small victory, his first breath without the need for a ventilator, his temperature stabilizing, was a triumph, but the road ahead was still uncertain. And through it all, there was Max. No one could explain it. How a retired military dog, traumatized by the death of his handler, had become the most dependable guardian of the NICU's most fragile patients. Max was no longer just a hero in the eyes of Jenny. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of love, duty, and an unwavering commitment to something larger than oneself. Even after the storm had passed and the rain had subsided, the hospital staff would often find Max standing vigil at the NICU entrance, guarding the babies as if they were his own. Yet, Max's mission wasn't complete. Jenny could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The dog wasn't just waiting for the baby to recover. He was waiting for something else. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted, and Jenny wasn't the only one who noticed it. The staff began talking about the dog's strange behavior, how he refused to rest, how he kept his eyes trained on the entrance, as if expecting someone to walk through the door. That's when Jenny started piecing together the connection. Max wasn't just waiting for a person. He was waiting for a purpose. It wasn't long before Jenny learned the truth from Hope's Haven. Max's story wasn't just one of military service. It was a story of a final promise made by a father to protect his daughter, even after death. Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson had foreseen a future where his daughter, Cherish, would need help. He had arranged for Max to be placed in the sanctuary in Rockford, Illinois, knowing that one day, something would happen that would require Max's intervention. The promise to look after his little girl was part of his last will. And so, when Max heard the baby's faint cry that night, it wasn't just the instincts of a military dog kicking in. It was his mission to protect, a promise that had been made years before. Jenny felt the weight of that promise now, knowing that the dog who had carried Alan through the storm was also carrying the weight of a family legacy, one built on love, sacrifice, and the commitment to never leave someone behind. It wasn't long before the hospital staff began to understand that Max was no ordinary service dog. His bond with Alan grew deeper each day. Every time Max entered the NICU, the babies in the wards seemed to calm, their stress levels decreasing. And Max, for the first time since his handler's death, seemed to have found his place again. His military precision was unmistakable, as though every step he took was guided by the same discipline he had learned in the battlefield. But now, he wasn't carrying soldiers to safety. He was guarding a new family. Max's presence brought something unexpected. It wasn't just the calm that spread throughout the NICU when he was around, but a sense of hope. Jenny had seen many babies in distress, and though she had witnessed miracles in her time, there was something different about the connection between Max and Alan. It wasn't just the physical care that helped the baby recover. It was the emotional reassurance Max provided, his loyalty offering the unspoken promise of protection, even in the darkest hours. But the real change came when a young woman named Cherish Wilson walked into the hospital, wearing a worn military jacket, her eyes tired but determined. She hadn't known Max was here. She didn't know that her father's last mission had led her to this moment, that Max had been waiting for her to fulfill her role in this story. Jenny had been by the baby's side when the security guard called her name. Max's behavior had changed instantly. He stood straighter, his eyes locked on the door, as if recognizing the figure in the hallway. It was Cherish. Jenny stepped forward cautiously, her eyes on the dog. She didn't know if this was the moment, the one that Max had been waiting for. But as Cherish stepped into the hospital's lobby, everything seemed to shift. Max, who had never strayed from his post, broke protocol. He slowly walked toward her, his tail wagging. She didn't speak at first. The only sound was the faint rustle of his military vest as Max stood by her side, his body pressing gently against hers. He's been waiting for you," Jenny said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cherish looked up at Jenny, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My father's dog," she whispered, her voice breaking. He's really here?" Max stood still for a moment, almost as if giving Cherish the time she needed to process what was happening. Then, slowly, he pressed against her leg again, urging her forward. His protective stance was unmistakable. He had completed his mission, to bring the baby to safety, and now he was ensuring that the next chapter of this family's healing could begin. In the quiet consultation room, Jenny could see the walls that had stood between Cherish and her family starting to crumble. Cherish had carried a burden of shame, guilt over her unexpected pregnancy, and fear that her family would see her as a disappointment. But in that moment, she realized something profound. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Max had carried not only the weight of Soldier's mission, but the weight of a family's hope for the future. He had been the bridge between a daughter and a mother, between a fallen soldier and his family's future. The weeks that followed were transformative, not just for Cherish and her family, but for everyone who had witnessed Max's incredible journey. What began as a single night of uncertainty, a storm, a dog with a mission, had blossomed into something that transcended even the most extraordinary circumstances. Swedish American Hospital had become the center of a movement, a story that resonated far beyond its walls. And at the heart of it all stood Max, the German shepherd whose loyalty and devotion had changed everything. Cherish had begun to heal, just as baby Alan had. The bond between mother and child grew stronger with each passing day. She had faced unimaginable obstacles, but now she was no longer running from them. She was stepping forward, ready to embrace her new role as a mother. Max remained by her side every step of the way. The hospital staff had integrated him into their daily routine, and he had earned a place not only as a symbol of hope, but as a partner in healing. His calming presence was felt in the NICU, his unwavering discipline and care becoming an integral part of their therapy for infants in distress. Max wasn't just a hero, he had become a living, breathing example of the power of love and loyalty. But even as Max's purpose continued to unfold, there was something else, something Jenny had noticed in the days before the hospital's protocols started to change. Max's movements were becoming slower, his joints aching, and though he never once complained, his energy was waning. The toll of his years of service, both on the battlefield and in the hospital, had begun to catch up with him. "Jenny," with her deep understanding of both medicine and the soul, could see it in his eyes. Max was ready for rest, but he wasn't ready to leave. He had one final mission to fulfill. He had brought Alan into the world of life-saving care. He had safeguarded Cherish's future. But now, it was time for him to bring closure to his own story. It was a quiet afternoon when the inevitable came. Max had spent his morning walking between the incubators and the NICU, his tail wagging weakly as he performed his usual rounds. He had greeted every infant, each one more fragile than the next, and had given them his unspoken blessing of protection. His steps were slower now, his body aching, but his eyes, those wise, knowing eyes, remained as sharp as ever. Jenny was by his side, her hand resting on his back. "It's okay, Max," she whispered. "You've done more than enough." Max's ears flicked slightly at the sound of her voice, and his tail wagged once more, though faintly. He had fulfilled his duty to his fallen handler, to the Wilson family, to the little boy who had been saved by his care. But his work was done. He had waited for this moment, and now it was time to rest. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the hospital staff gathered in the NICU. Max, his body exhausted, but his spirit unbroken, lay peacefully on the floor beside Cherish. She was there, just as he had promised his handler. She had become the mother she was meant to be, the protector of Alan's future. "Thank you," Cherish whispered, her fingers gently running through Max's fur. "You've helped me more than you could ever know." Jenny stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. It was a quiet moment, one that felt sacred. In this room, in this moment, Max had given everything for the Wilson family, and in return, they had given him their love, their respect, and their unwavering trust. As Max closed his eyes for the final time, a sense of peace settled over the room. His last breath was a quiet exhale, a soldier's final salute to the family he had sworn to protect. The next day, the hospital held a ceremony in Max's honor. The hallways were lined with those who had been touched by his story, by the bond between man, dog, and family. The Wilson family stood together, a family who had been healed by the very dog that had once been broken. Cherish, standing tall beside her baby, held on to Max's collar, a symbol of the promise that had been fulfilled. Max was buried near the Wilson Memorial Garden, where a bronze statue of him stood as a testament to his service. The plaque beneath it read, "The bravest hearts walk on four legs. The strongest medicine comes wrapped in fur." And as the years passed, the story of Max's devotion, the story of a soldier's promise, will be passed down through generations. It wasn't just a story of a dog who saved a life. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and the unwavering strength that comes when you make a promise and never, ever break it. Max's story is a powerful reminder of the unseen bonds that shape our lives. It teaches us that true service never ends. It transforms, adapts, and continues to protect even when we least expect it. In a world that often feels divided, Max shows us that love and loyalty can bridge any gap, heal any wound, and bring families back together. We are all capable of great acts of love, and sometimes. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you had a dog who has been your guardian? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Heart Force for more stories that touch your heart.